So my first experiences in astronomy, I think, began for me as a child. I'm probably maybe 5 years old when my dad used to bring the Christmas tree home, obviously every Christmas, and put it up in the front living room, and I'd crawl underneath it and lie on my back and look through the branches and see all the different coloured lights. And I think that sort of lit something up in me, to forgive the pun, but just seeing all the different coloured lights and realising they're all, different coloured for a reason. And some were close and some were distant, and you can see metaphorically how they could associate with stars in the nighttime sky. And I think a natural progression then was, of course, to move in onto a telescope, and I didn't have one, but my brother got one for Christmas one year, and so I started to use it, and that's when I first saw the moon, and I was mesmerised, and I was pretty much hooked from that point onwards. There's something just lit up inside of me that I didn't know where it came from, to be quite honest. The pressures for a young man growing up then in the 80s, and certainly for me, were huge. You don't always have an awareness of them in the moment, because as a kid, there's conscious decisions about where your life's going to go, and I thought that I'd take this path of least resistance and get involved with the rest of the guys. Certainly from when maybe I was 15, 16-year-old, I started getting involved in football hooliganism. And I remember one infamous night when Sunderland played Chelsea in the semi-finals of the Milk Cup, and that was an horrendous night here in the town for the city as well, because there was a lot of trouble that night. But the really interesting thing about it all was it gave you a huge adrenaline run. It really, really did. I mean, because you can probably imagine, it's really quite innate to fight. And that night, I after the game, got involved with a fight with maybe 50, 60 Chelsea fans, and there was like 20, 30, 40 of us lot, and there was a big fight, and then I got hit in the head with a brick, and I still carry the scar today. And it was an awful night. I mean, I ended up in hospital, as you can probably imagine. A brick hitting you in the head, it's not something you're going to walk away from. And I didn't either, and I ended up in hospital, and I have to say that was a massively defining moment in my life. I realised at that point when I went home, I see my small child and my wife, this has got to stop. So by the time I'd left school and I was a young man now, was a mate of mine who was working as a bricklayer essentially said to me, well, there's a course you can go under it if you want. And because at this time I was in a real crisis, because I was thinking to myself, well, I've got a family, and now I had child number 2 as well, and I'm thinking to myself, this is going downhill fast. I was happy because I had my own family, it was great, but I'm thinking professionally, what am I going to do? I need to earn money. So I just took what I could get. And so I ended up working as a brickie on a building site, and I ended up staying there for 25 years. It all really started to change when I was in the mid-30s, and I met a guy called David Sinden, who owned a company called Sinden Optical Company in Wrighton. And David was the chief optical engineer for Grubb Parsons, who were an engineering firm in Newcastle. Now, Grubb Parsons were one of the biggest and most successful engineering companies around, because he used to build big telescopes. Then he got me to go up to Kielder, and then that was it. I couldn't believe the dark skies, and I had a telescope. That's when I joined the Sunderland Astronomical Society, or the SAS, whose motto, of course, is "Who Stares Wins." And when I joined the Sunderland Astronomical Society, suddenly I had this family of like-minded people who, like me, weren't working professionally in astronomy, but had a burning passion for the night sky and, learning a little bit more about the physics of the universe. And that was it. I couldn't believe it. It was like, I felt like I'd came home. And what started to happen was, when I got introduced to the Kielder region with David Sinden, and after I'd built the Cygnus Observatory, it was then I started to realise, well, I want to build another observatory. But the next one I built, I didn't realise what it was going to start off. And so I got really quite interested in the Kielder region, and I'd mentioned a few people that we could build an observatory in Kielder, and met a few interesting people. Peter Sharp was the main one, who was a curator for art and architecture in the region. And at this time still, I was working on building sites. This was still my day job, but I started to get an idea that if we built an observatory in Kielder, maybe, just maybe, what if it became a career path? What if it became so interesting to people that they also would want to use it? And this could be a way to develop a business strategy, and I could end up maybe working in astronomy. And I'd be like, nah, that's just crazy, right? So the transition from being a bricklayer into an astronomer is like quite an acute one, but it did happen, but it was very slow, the process. And it wasn't until I was in my very late 30s and early 40s, well, late 30s, 40, 41, when I really stopped the bricklaying completely. Peter Sharp was working on the art and architecture up in Kielder, and he'd heard about what I was trying to do. So I had a meeting, and he said to me, what if I had a budget for about £150,000? Oh, I nearly fell off my chair. And I was like, well, yeah, I mean, that's amazing. And the next day, Peter called me after we had really lengthy conversations about it, and he said, would you like to be the astronomical advisor on the project for the observatory? And I was like, yeah, too right. So that was it. So my idea to build an observatory in Kielder and meeting Peter Sharp, two came together, and we started to run with the idea to build an observatory up in Kielder. We're doing all our funding applications, and money was starting to come in. And then, of course, the design was coming in. Then we started to realise 150k ain't going to make it. So it trebled, and we had a budget of just under 500,000 eventually to build the Kielder Observatory, and then we built it. And in April 2008, the observatory was opened, and I was installed as the director and the lead astronomer at the observatory, and that was it. How I'd like to be remembered would be just as somebody who had the get up and go and had a vision and made it happen, but also to create something that others could use and take it on and on and on and never let it die off, but always for the message to get out to every single human being in the world that we are absolutely part of something amazing, and try just to let that in, even if it means reading a physics book or sitting outside on a starry night and looking up into the depths of the universe and just thinking, what's out there? Who else is out there? And where did it all come from, and how do I fit into all this? People have said to me many times, the universe is very big, and it is. It's probably infinite in its volume, it's just not infinite in time. This is the interesting thing. But people often say to me, they say, well, it makes me feel really quite insignificant and small. Well, consider this. Our Milky Way is our home galaxy, and inside of it there's 300 billion stars, and our sun is one of those stars. And in the observable universe there's another 2 trillion galaxies. Each one of these galaxies containing up to 100 billion stars like our sun. And what we do know is 90% of those stars have planets. So if there are so many stars in the universe, and there are so many galaxies in the universe, and there are, where is all this supposed life elsewhere in the universe? There's an eerie silence. Could that mean that we are the only intelligent civilization in the entire universe? If that's true, and it might be, insignificant as the last thing human beings are. And I think, if anything, my legacy would be, just think about that.
I've come a long way, 1,000 years. I am live.